Every Tuesday morning, the same hunched man rides the garbage truck down Maple Avenue. He moves slowly, wears the same brown gloves, and never speaks more than a few words. Children laugh behind his back. Some homeowners mutter. But one morning, after a local influencer filmed herself mocking him live online, something unexpected happened. The stream glitched, then cut. Moments later, four black government SUVs pulled into the neighborhood. And when the men inside stepped out, they weren't there to talk. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like the video. Maple Avenue always looked clean. It had manicured lawns, pastel mailboxes, and the kind of neighbors who judged you by your recycling habits. And every Tuesday, right on time, the old garbage truck groaned its way down the street. At the back of the truck stood him. No one really knew his name. Most called him Gramps or the slow guy. He wore the same faded uniform every week, navy coveralls, patched at the knees, and brown work gloves that never seemed to come off. His posture was bent, as if he were bowing permanently to the weight of the job. He never complained. Never smiled either. He just collected. One bin at a time. Think he sleeps in that truck? A teenager once joked. Probably doesn't even have a house, someone else replied. Truth was, no one knew where he went after the shift. He didn't drink coffee at the gas station, didn't shop in town, didn't show up on any town records, not even the voting rolls. Still, he showed up every Tuesday. Without fail. Eleanor Bixby, a widow in her 80s, was one of the few who waved. You take care now, she'd say, and he'd nod, almost invisible under his cap. Name's Charles, she once told a new neighbor. I asked. He said it like it hurt. On the third Tuesday of September, everything changed. Because that was the morning Brinley Harmon, local influencer and self-proclaimed neighborhood critic, decided to go live on her front lawn. Her stream was supposed to be funny. Her title? Trashman Tuesday. Watch Gramps try not to fall over. She filmed him from behind a hydrangea bush as he approached her driveway. Here he comes, she whispered, giggling. God, he moves like a zombie. The old man didn't react. He just hoisted her garbage bin with a practiced, mechanical motion, dumped it into the compactor, and lowered it back to the curb. But then something happened. As she zoomed in on his gloves, the screen began to flicker, distort. Then a sharp static burst. The live stream cut out. Her phone went dark. 2 houses away, a neighbor's smart doorbell glitched and rebooted. Street cameras flickered. Even the radio in a parked patrol car buzzed with sudden feedback. Less than 5 minutes later, 4 black SUVs turned onto Maple Avenue. No sirens. No lights. They stopped mid-street. Doors opened. Men in suits stepped out. Calm. Coordinated. Focused. Brinley, confused, kept recording. One of the men looked directly into her lens and said, Ma'am, we need you to step back. Who are you? She asked, laughing nervously. The man pulled out a badge. Not police. Not FBI. Just 3 letters she didn't recognize. Then he said something she'd never forget. We're here for the man with the gloves. The men moved like they already knew the layout of the street, where the driveways curved, which homes had dogs, who had cameras. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They just approached the garbage truck, where the old man stood like he'd been expecting them. Brinley was still live streaming on her second phone now. Her first one had completely shut down, screen frozen mid-frame. Okay, guys, she whispered, ducking behind her mailbox. They're talking to him. This is, like, really weird. The lead agent, mid-50s, silver buzzcut, earpiece, stepped up to the truck. He didn't raise his voice. Sir, he said, we need your gloves. Charles looked down at his hands. The gloves were cracked, discolored with age and oil. He didn't speak. You're not in trouble, the man added. But you know protocol. Charles didn't respond. Just unhooked the lift, stepped off the truck, and walked to the sidewalk. Slowly, as if choosing every step. You have 30 seconds, he said. The agent nodded, turned to his men. Sweep the truck. The others moved fast, opening compartments, unscrewing floor plates, checking the dashboard. One pulled something from the engine bay, a black cube no bigger than a paperback. It's active, he called out. Charles just stood there, watching. Brinley's chat was blowing up. What's in the cube? Is this a deepfake prank? Someone Google what protocol uses gloves. And then someone commented. If this makes you angry, type respect in the comments. Back on the sidewalk, the agent approached Charles again. We never thought you'd stay this long, he said. I gave them my word, Charles replied. You were supposed to check in every 5 years. I'm not who I was. You know that. A pause. Don't make us bring the full detail. Charles finally looked up. You don't have enough men for that. The air shifted. The street, once full of casual Tuesday routine, now hummed with invisible tension. Behind the agents, the garbage truck let out a low hydraulic hiss. The cube beeped once. Faint, but unmistakable. The agent signaled. Secure it. They wrapped the object in a thick gray blanket, placed it inside a lead-lined case, and sealed it with a code that required 2 separate thumbprints. Charles turned away. I'm done for today, he said. You're not done, the agent replied. You're just out of excuses. Then something surprising happened. Charles reached into his pocket and handed the man a folded piece of paper. Names, he said simply. The ones who were watching. The ones who've forgotten. The agent unfolded it. Scanned it once. Twice. Then looked up, visibly shaken. Where'd you get these? They still leave garbage, Charles said quietly. They always do. Have you ever misjudged someone, only to realize they carried more strength than you imagined? How did that change you? That evening, Maple Avenue was unusually quiet. Brinley deleted her original stream, but it was too late. The clip had already spread. It was all over military Reddit threads, encrypted forums, and veteran channels. And somewhere, miles away, a red light blinked on a server that hadn't been touched in 20 years. A voice crackled through an old radio line. Asset Charlie 17 has resurfaced. Shadow window may be compromised. The next morning, Charles returned to work. Same gloves. Same truck. No words. But now, children didn't laugh. They watched. They whispered. And from her porch, Eleanor Bixby smiled softly, whispering under her breath. They're starting to remember you, aren't they? If you believe those who sacrificed for others deserve to be honored every day, subscribe to us, because quiet heroes never stop serving. Wednesday morning came cold and fast. Fog crawled low along the sidewalks, and the air felt heavier than usual. Charles was already out by 6 a.m., moving down his route, block by block. Same pace, same gloves. But the street wasn't the same anymore. People watched from behind curtains. Some opened windows and then quietly closed them again. Children didn't wave, they stood still. A man who normally tossed his trash out with one hand now waited silently until Charles had passed. Word had spread. Not from Brinley's stream, it was already flagged, down, reposted, and erased from all public sites. But the bootleg copies made it to the right places. Places where people had seen men disappear like this before. Charles turned onto Sycamore Street and slowed. Midway down the block sat a bin no one ever dared to touch. The house was abandoned. Foreclosed. Windows blacked out with newspaper. But every Wednesday, without fail, a single gray trash bin sat at the curb. Locals joked about it. Probably full of old batteries. Maybe a body. Haunted, for sure. But Charles had always stopped for it. Not because of what was inside, but because of what used to be. He knelt beside the bin, pressed his palm against the handle. A small click sounded. From under the bin. Not mechanical. Not garbage-related. Something else. A signal. Seconds later, a black sedan pulled up to the curb across the street. No markings. No plates. Inside sat the man from the lead SUV the day before. His earpiece crackled. Did he open it? Negative, the agent replied. He just activated it. Inside the bin sat one item, a sealed manila envelope. Charles lifted it gently. As he turned to leave, his eyes landed on a boy standing in a driveway 2 houses down. Maybe 10 years old. Backpack on. Still. Watching. Charles gave him a short nod. The boy nodded back. It was the first nod of the day, but not the last. At town hall, the mayor was pacing. This is insane, she muttered. He's just a garbage man. The deputy mayor cleared his throat. That garbage man was just linked to an intelligence flag with clearance over our pay grades. I don't care, she snapped. I want him off my streets. He's making people nervous. Outside her window, 2 men in plain black coats stood near a parked truck. Listening, not moving, watching the mayor speak, recording every word. That afternoon, Charles sat alone behind the station, peeling a banana with his gloved hands. He never took them off, not even to eat. Tanya, one of the younger sanitation workers, walked up slowly. Mr. Charles, she asked. He looked up, said nothing. Why? Why are they following you? He stared at her. Quiet. Long. Then said, because I still know where they buried it. Her brows furrowed. Buried what? He handed her a tiny slip of paper, folded twice. She opened it. Inside, just 3 words. Handwritten. Operation Silence Gate. She had no idea what it meant, But she could feel, deep in her gut, it wasn't something she was supposed to see. Have you ever witnessed someone punished for an act of kindness? If so, share a small word of gratitude in the comments. Even just a name is enough to keep light in our lives. Later that night, that same piece of paper was scanned, uploaded, and sent through a back-channel server monitored by retired military analysts. Within minutes, 3 separate government files were pulled from deep storage, all stamped Top Secret, Burn After Read. And one name appeared on all 3. Charles Nolan, Master Sergeant, U.S. Army Special Projects Unit. Missing, presumed dead, 1996. If it moved you to, type respect in the comments. Charles Nolan. The name hadn't been spoken aloud in over 2 decades. Not in any official capacity. Not by anyone still wearing a uniform. His file, the original one, had been locked under biometric seal in a facility somewhere in Virginia, a room referred to by insiders as the icebox. The kind of place where names didn't disappear because they were irrelevant, but because they were too relevant. And now, it was out. The signal had passed through a decrypted relay used only by former Black Ops liaisons, a dead channel most believed hadn't been active since the Clinton administration. But when Tanya scanned and uploaded that scrap of paper, Operation Silence Gate, a forgotten system stirred. Lights blinked. Old alarms blinked to life. Retired analysts blinked awake. And someone, somewhere in a cement room without windows, stood up and made a phone call that began with, "It's him. He's alive." In Bellwood, the weather turned sharply colder. Wind tore through alleyways. People walked faster now, eyes down, doors locked earlier. At the sanitation department, Charles sat at his locker, gloves still on. His uniform, faded and threadbare, still carried the same stitched name tag, Nolan, that no one had ever read closely. He was staring at a Polaroid photo. It showed 6 men. Camouflage gear. No smiles. Dirt on their faces. A helicopter behind them, mid-desert, rotors caught mid-turn. 5 of the men were crossed out in black ink. Only one remained uncrossed. The man in the center. Him. Across town, Tanya sat in her car, staring at the slip of paper again. She had Googled Operation Silence Gate. Nothing. Not a page. Not a whisper. But that didn't stop her from posting the words to a veterans forum she found by accident, buried 3 links deep into a now-defunct domain. She asked, simply, "Anyone know what this is?" Found it from a sanitation worker named Charles. The post was up for exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds before it disappeared. Her account was locked. Her phone froze. Then rang. An unlisted number. She didn't answer. 10 minutes later, a black SUV passed slowly down her street. Back on Charles's route, something happened. Mid-shift, he stopped the truck in front of a brick duplex that hadn't put out a bin. He stepped down anyway, walked up the driveway, opened a small green utility box beside the house. Inside it was a rusted metal capsule. He unscrewed it carefully. Inside, a cassette tape, labeled in pen. Field number 6, watch only if breached. He slipped it into a small cloth pouch beneath his vest and turned to leave. But across the street, someone watched him through a window. An older man, eyes wide, face pale. He dropped the curtain immediately. He remembered him. By sundown, Bellwood's rumor mill was in overdrive. "Did you hear he used to be CIA? My neighbor says he saw him take down a man with one hand back in '04. They say he buried something during that base closure. Something they never found." But Charles didn't answer questions. He didn't change his pace. He didn't take interviews. He just kept working, one bin at a time, until he reached the final house. The mayor's. Her bin was missing. She hadn't put one out in weeks. Instead, taped to her porch railing was a small white envelope, with his name on it. Inside was a typed note. "We know what's under the landfill. You should have stayed dead." And a single photo. Aerial. Infrared. Recent. It showed a section of Bellwood's landfill glowing faint red, like something under there was still active. Back at the sanitation depot, Tanya finally found Charles alone. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer. She held up her phone. "People are scared. People are asking questions. There are SUVs circling town. What did you do?" Charles looked at her, really looked, and then, slowly, removed one glove. The hand beneath was scarred, burned, etched with a strange tattoo across the knuckles. A military symbol, but not from any known branch. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "I prevented something." Tanya stared. "Prevented what?" He replaced the glove and said just 3 words. "The second breach." If you believe respect shouldn't wear out with time, type respect in the comments. What moment in your life did justice arrive late but sweet? Thursday morning came with frost on the windshield and silence in the air. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Across Bellwood, a dozen unmarked vehicles had repositioned overnight. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted Charles to know, "We're here." Inside the sanitation depot, Charles unlocked his locker, reached behind the shelf where the false panel rested, pulled out the cassette tape, the one marked Field Number 6, and a small portable player wrapped in a wool sock. He pressed play. The sound was grainy, but the voice that filled the room was unmistakable. "This is Commander Harris. If you're hearing this, Silence Gate is failed containment. Breach protocol is active. Burn all access sites. Secure witnesses. And above all, never, ever let them open the vault." Charles paused the tape, exhaled slowly. He hadn't heard Harris's voice in 23 years. Harris was supposed to be dead. Later that afternoon, Tanya watched from the break room as a man in a military cut entered the office and asked for employee Nolan. The receptionist checked the sheet. "Sorry, we don't have a Nolan here." The man gave a cold smile. "You do. You just don't know it." Tanya stood up before she even realized it. "He's not here," she said. The man turned, eyes sharp. "You should stay out of this." "I tried," she said. "But now I have a question." The man raised an eyebrow. "What question?" She stepped closer, held his gaze. "What's in the landfill?" The man's expression didn't change, but his pupils contracted. "You don't want to know." "I think I already do." Then he said something she'd never forget. "This town's trash has been covering our mistakes for decades." Meanwhile, at the edge of the Bellwood landfill, a government crew in hazmat suits was setting up a temporary tent. Two ground-penetrating radar trucks circled a section marked in faded orange paint. From the air, it looked ordinary, just mounds of waste and dirt. But the readings said otherwise. Below it, buried under 23 feet of compacted earth and concrete, was a steel door the size of a bus. Stamped on the door, in flaked red paint, were the words, "Operation Silence Gate, Classified Level Zulu." Back in town, Charles stood at Eleanor Bixby's porch. She was waiting for him, two teacups already steaming. "I saw the cars again," she said. "Like it's 1972 all over." Charles nodded. "They're circling. You always said they'd come back." "I hoped they wouldn't." She handed him an envelope. "Found this in the attic. It's yours. Thought I burned it back then. Guess not." Inside, Charles found a photo he thought was long gone, a younger version of himself standing next to a group of men in radiation gear, all giving thumbs up in front of a steel hatch. Only two of the men were still alive, and Charles knew where both were. That night, a live stream surfaced on an encrypted channel. It showed a nighttime dig at the landfill. Flashlights. Motion. Workers prying something up from under the dirt. Viewers posted screenshots. One showed a silver cylindrical pod being hoisted up by crane. Another caught part of the writing along its side. "Property of United States Experimental Forces." The feed cut mid-frame, but not before one viewer posted, "He told me this would happen 30 years ago. Charles Nolan saved my platoon. We owe him more than silence." Have you ever known someone who carried the weight of others without ever asking for recognition? Leave their name in the comments. Let us remember them together. Back in his small apartment, Charles slipped the cassette back into its pouch and wrote 3 words on the envelope. "For Tanya, if I don't return." Then he picked up his gloves. His real ones. The pair stitched with Kevlar, lead thread lining, and a pressure-activated override node in the right palm. He hadn't worn them in 23 years. But tomorrow, he'd need them again. Because tomorrow, they were going to open the vault. If you're outraged, type shame in the comments to stand with those who sacrificed for our country. At 7:42 a.m., a soft vibration ran through the pavement at the edge of the Bellwood landfill. No one on Maple Avenue felt it. But Charles did. He had just finished tightening the straps on his boots. The same pair he'd worn into Zone 12 back in '92. He looked out his window and saw the hazmat tent being dismantled in the distance. They were almost there. Tanya arrived moments later, breath fogging in the morning air. "Is it true?" she asked. He didn't need to ask what she meant. "They broke the seal," he said. "Last night, at 3:11 a.m. "What's in there?" Charles took a long time to answer. "There's a man inside," he said at last. Tanya blinked. "Alive?" "Not exactly." The vault beneath the landfill was never meant to be accessed again. It had been designed as a tomb, not for a person, but for a mistake. Operation Silence Gate wasn't a storage program. It was an experimental personnel project, a sealed environment. 2 men had volunteered to stay underground, exposed to a classified serum in prolonged isolation for 10 years. Only one survived, but his mind didn't. Charles had been there the day they closed the hatch, had stood at the edge of the pit and saluted the men below, hoping that the science was wrong, that it wouldn't destroy who they were. But it had, and now they brought him back up. At 10:17 a.m., the pod was wheeled into a temporary containment lab beside the landfill. The man inside, gray skin, emaciated form, eyes unnaturally still, was strapped to a gurney, unconscious. Monitors blinked. ECG, BP, oxygen levels, normal. Too normal. One of the techs whispered, "He shouldn't be alive." A doctor corrected him. "He isn't." Then the man's eyes opened, and the lights in the lab dimmed by half. Charles walked into the lab an hour later. No badge. No escort. Just the gloves. 3 guards tried to stop him. He didn't raise a hand. Just looked at them. 2 backed away. 1 didn't. Charles leaned in. "Ask your CO about Red Knight. Then decide." The guard stepped aside. Inside the containment room, the man on the gurney turned his head. His voice was dry, but clear. "Nolan." Charles nodded. "You remember?" The man smiled. It was not kind. "I've been waiting," he said. "I know." On the wall behind them, a monitor began to blink red. Memory fragments reactivating. Protocol command code. Wolf, Shadow 6. "What's happening?" Tanya asked from the hallway. Charles didn't look back. He's not just a man. He's a carrier. A carrier of what? Charles turned to her. And for the first time in all her life, Tanya saw fear in his eyes. Of what we buried. And what never dies. If this makes you angry, type respect in the comments section. That afternoon, a lockdown alert was issued across the eastern seaboard's classified communications grid. Only a dozen people received it. All of them retired. All of them presumed irrelevant. But they remembered the voice encoded in the message. Charles Nolan. Containment breached. Silence gate opened. Secondary protocol engaged. You know where to meet. Tanya followed Charles back to the truck. She couldn't believe it, but she said it anyway. "You're going to fix this, aren't you?" Charles looked at her. "No," he said. "We are." And with that, he handed her a set of gloves. They weren't ordinary. They had her name already stitched into the lining. Have you ever misjudged a person, only to find they'd been protecting you all along? Share your story. Because even silent shields deserve to be remembered. By midnight, the vault lab was silent. The man on the gurney hadn't moved in hours. His vitals hadn't changed. But those who watched him, the men in hazmat suits, the officers behind mirrored glass, kept flinching. Because every so often, he whispered. Single words. In a voice that didn't quite match the body. Eagle, glass, verify, echo. Each word was a code. A phrase from a dead network. But one word hadn't come yet. The one they all feared. Meanwhile, Charles and Tanya were parked outside Bellwood Elementary. It was the rendezvous point. Not because of strategy. Because of symbolism. Back in 1993, Charles had buried a failsafe under this school's boiler room, sealed inside a lead-lined case marked L7 containment. He'd done it under the radar. No orders. No paperwork. Just instinct. Because he'd known even back then. One day, they'd open the door again. He passed Tanya a folder. Open it. Inside, a faded blueprint. Aerial shot. 2 overlapping shapes. One was the landfill vault. The other, a neural pattern. A brain scan. Tanya stared. Wait, this is a person? Charles nodded. His. The man in the vault. But it's not right. Because it's not just him anymore. At 3:12 a.m., the lab alarm went off. The gurney was empty. The restraints had been unlocked from inside. The lights flickered. Backup generators kicked in. And on every monitor, a phrase scrolled in red. Trigger phrase detected. Vessel awake. They sealed the room. But it was too late. Back in the truck, Charles was loading gear into a battered footlocker. Items that didn't belong in a sanitation rig. Old frequency jammers, chemical tags, a sidearm that had been decommissioned in 1987. Tanya looked up from the map. Where are we going? Back to where it began. Witches. He looked at her, tired but steady. The incinerator pit. Sector 12. Bottom of the landfill. She hesitated. You think he'll go there? No. I know he already has. They reached the landfill perimeter at dawn. Fog blanketed the site like a memory no one wanted. Trucks idled quietly. The containment tent was gone. So were the guards. A bootprint trail led to the lower basin, where a hatch had been opened. The hatch Charles himself had welded shut 30 years ago. He stepped to the edge, listened. From below, he could hear humming, but not mechanical, human, like someone singing to themselves. In the dark, they descended in silence. Tanya held the flashlight. Charles led with the sensor wand, checking for movement, heat, radiation. The deeper they went, the colder it got, until they reached the final chamber and found the figure standing inside. He had removed the containment suit. Now just skin, pale, covered in surgical lines. He turned and smiled. "Welcome back," he said. Charles raised the wand. "You don't belong here." The man tilted his head. "I never left." Tanya felt the air shift, like something pressing against her lungs. She tried to step forward, but Charles stopped her. "Don't speak," he whispered. "He's waiting for a trigger phrase. What would you do if your mother was disrespected like this? If you believe respecting those who sacrificed is the minimum we owe them, type never forget in the comments." Then, the man turned to Tanya and said one sentence. "You're not supposed to be part of this." Charles moved fast, pulled her back, triggered the flare beacon, and activated his glove. A pulse of light exploded from his palm. The chamber shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The figure staggered back, shrieking, not in pain, but recognition. He remembered that glove, because it was his. Once, long ago, before he lost control, before they locked him away, the cave began to collapse. Charles grabbed Tanya's hand and ran. Up the shaft, out of the hatch, into the breaking daylight. Behind them, the vault closed. Not sealed this time. Buried. Back at the sanitation depot, a letter waited for Tanya in her locker. And signed. But inside it read, "If I don't return, you keep the route. Not because of the trash. Because of what it teaches you. To lift what others throw away." If you've ever known someone like that, type respect in the comments. 1 week later, Bellwood was still on edge. But the landfill was closed. Official reason? Structural instability. Unofficial reason? No one was brave enough to ask. The hatch was buried again, this time with reinforced concrete and a perimeter of steel poles sunk 15 feet into the earth. No sign, no markings, just silence. The kind of silence that says, this is where something ended. Or maybe, where something was contained. Charles didn't return to work that Monday. Or the next. Tanya kept the route. She wore the gloves now, his gloves. They didn't fit perfectly. Not yet. But the stitching held. And somehow, when she pulled them on, her hands stopped shaking. She drove the truck at the same speed. Took the same turns. Nodded at Eleanor Bixby, who now waved with both hands. The town didn't laugh anymore. They nodded. They paused. They respected. Inside the depot, Charles's locker remained closed. Padlocked. Untouched. Until one morning, the supervisor found a manila envelope on his own desk. Inside were keys. A thumb drive. A single sentence handwritten in neat black ink. There are still 2 names left. You'll know when it's time. The thumb drive contained maps, coordinates, a dossier marked shadow window, and an audio clip. Faint, glitched, but clear enough. A voice whispering, "Echo," confirmed. On her 3rd route day, Tanya received a letter. It was postmarked from Montana. No return address. Inside, a Polaroid. The same group Charles had shown her in the break room. But this time, no one was crossed out. On the back, "I remember all their names now. I remember mine too." Below that, in block print, Charles Nolan, Master Sergeant retired. Not forgotten. She held the photo to her chest and let herself cry. Not loudly. Not for long. Just enough. That night, Tanya posted one final message to the same encrypted forum. Route 7 is secure. Landfill closed. One still out there. We're watching. We're ready. Replies came in from all corners of the country. Route 9 clear. Zone 12 rekeyed. Welcome to the circuit, Tanya. And one message stood out. He trained you. That means something. The town slowly returned to normal. Sort of. Children now pointed at the garbage truck not with laughter, but with curiosity. Parents waved. Veterans stood outside with coffee and offered quiet nods. Because they knew. Even if they didn't know why. The depot workers voted to install a small brass plaque above the breakroom door. It reads, "To those who lifted the heavy things and never asked to be seen." And every Tuesday morning, Tanya drives the route. Same time, same streets, same rhythm. Because someone has to carry what others throw away. Someone has to notice the things buried beneath. and someone has to be ready, in case it ever happens again. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let YouTube promote stories of kindness.